Man, it's cold. Now we're finally up to Module 6, where we're going to be looking at organizational behavior, managerialism, and information technology, as well as rational choice theory. And those are covered in the Guo-Brennsn Chapter 8 and Schaffer's Chapters 7 and 8. Rational choice theory is the subject of Chapter 8 in the Guo-Brennsn text. It's really based on neoclassic economic theory applied in the public sector. It's also known under different terminologies such as political economy, welfare economics, and the rational or public choice theory. And it really stems from the work of Adam Smith, who wrote this very famous book called The Wealth of Nations. It was first published in 1776 in England. This is the height of the American Revolution. And it really is the basis for modern economics and modern market-based economics. It's the idea that people acting in pursuit of their own self-interest could, through the mechanism of what Smith called the invisible hand, produce collective benefits that profited all of society. And that's Adam Smith in the background of this image here. So basically what he's saying is that people who, let's say, open businesses or entrepreneurs, they do so because it makes them wealthy, it makes them feel good about themselves for whatever reason. There are positive gains that they as individuals have or obtain from through this investment or opening of a business. But it also has a greater good for the larger society. By those individuals profiting, it produces collective benefits that we all enjoy. For this to be the case, it takes really three elements. There's the self-interested actor, the person who's opening the business or doing the investment. There also must be competition among various producers. There can't just be one business or one person producing this good, and that's a monopoly. There must be several. That encourages those that are producing it to compete with each other so they don't just overcharge everyone. Also, for it to work, it must be a relatively unregulated market. And there's a lot of issues today that's becoming a problem. These three elements are all hallmarks of neoclassic economic thought and central to rational choice theory. So let's take a look at economic theory in the public sector. Anthony Downs wrote in his text, An Economic Theory of Democracy, and James Buchanan and Gordon Tullock published The Calculus of Consent in the late 50s and late 60s. They emphasize the idea of a rational self-interested actor, which again is similar to what Adam Smith proposed. That this rational self-interested actor pursues their own interest that produces benefit for the society. The public-spirited citizen and the neutrally competent public servant ended up being replaced with the rational utility maximizer, or this rational self-interested actor. This contradicts some orthodox public administration notions of who should provide public services and how. Traditionally, it's thought that public administrators, government workers, should provide services. This rational choice idea says that no, individuals should make their own decisions based on what's in their own self-interest. There are two key assumptions of this rational choice theory. The average individual is a self-interested utility maximizer, and I think most of us generally are. We don't want to waste resources. We do what's in our own interest for the most part. And then the second assumption is that only individuals, not collectives, make decisions. It also presumes that collective decisions are aggregations of individual choices. Chapter 7 in the Shaffer's book looks at organizational behavior. So what are we talking about with organizational behavior? It's really the understanding of human behavior in organizations and how human behavior impacts organizational work. It really evolved through the work of Mary Parker Follett, who wrote around the turn of the 20th century, early 1800s. She made significant contributions in public administration's quest to understand how organizations worked. She was a major voice in what would become to be called participatory management. She wrote about the advantages of exercising power within, in other words, power from inside the organization, as opposed to power over, which involves working with employees, not lording over employees. Her law of the situation was contingency management and its origins. Follett was one of the first to focus on the theory of individuals within organizations, which is the crux of understanding organizational behavior. Despite her early work, nothing really changed until fairly recently. Modern organizational behaviorists really consider the introduction of new technologies and how that impacts organizational behavior. They immediately start thinking and planning within a specific framework. They want to minimize fear of change by involving people at all levels in designing the introduction of the changes. And hopefully they'll minimize the negative impacts of change, such as technology. They want to co-opt informal and formal leaders, especially those who might become antagonists of the proposed change. They also seek alternatives for employees who do not see the changes as consistent with their personal goals. Organizational behavior also considers group dynamics. Most employees who perform sets of specialized functions are clustered together in work groups. Work units, work branches, things like that, or even divisions or departments. And those different divisions, departments come together and are organized into larger agencies. Work groups tend to attract people with similar backgrounds. For example, similar training, socialization, experience, things like that, education. They all generally share backgrounds involving socialization of people into common values, beliefs, or behavioral systems. At least generally. Certainly everyone is different, but a lot of accountants have a similar socialization, or planners, let's say. We'll learn how to think and act like whatever profession we're in: lawyers, teachers, accountants. Acceptance of and adherence to group norms allows us to know what to expect from each other, and then to predict what other members of the group will do, or what members outside of the group will even do. When a group becomes institutionalized within an organization, they shared beliefs, values, and assumptions, or norms, become the essence of a cohesive group and of the organizational subculture. In other words, that group within the large organizational culture has a culture in and of itself. Again, if you've worked with any large organization or in any large organizations, you've seen that. Even within the military, different subunits within the military share a common bond. These different groups all come together within a larger military framework. Formal groups are officially created by a larger organization, usually for the purpose of accomplishing specific tasks. Again, think of it from the military standpoint. Different units have specialized skills. that have specialized cultures. Informal groups tend to be made up of individuals who have spontaneously developed relationships and patterns of interactions in work situations. Again, nothing's formalized. It's just, again, more informal relationships. In terms of organizational development, the mantra is often change or die. Change tends to be constant. We're always looking for ways to improve things, to renovate, or reinvent. Social organism will die just as surely as the solitary legionnaire of old will die without the ability to change. Organizational development, or OD, is planned change. It's an approach or strategy for increasing organizational effectiveness. There is no universal OD model to use, though you'll learn in various classes here at Troy that there are different models that are used, and you'll study several of those, I'm sure. The OD process is made all the more difficult to implement in the public sector because top management, which must first be sold on the idea, tends to be fractured and must consider various stakeholders, including political actors, career executives, legislative committees, other clientele, external stakeholders, citizens, things like that. Change like this, particularly when it involves the organizational culture or climate, must be well planned in advance and implemented gradually in a very planful way. And there are a variety of different ways to do this, which again, you'll study about going forward. Managerialism is covered in Chapter 8 of the Shafford's text. Managerialism, or also called entrepreneurial management, really came about in the 70s and 80s due to increased social awareness. Due to increased social awareness, communities were changing, the working communities were changing. New systems were evolving. And through managerialism, managers and leaders were seen to be unleashing their creative abilities to develop and transform organizations. This traditional by-the-book approach was fading away. People were encouraged to be creative and to think outside the box. In the 80s and 90s, this new paradigm came to be known as reinventing government. In the U.S., it was reinventing government movement, and in the outside of the U.S., it was called New Public Management. But generally, they all fall under the managerialism banner. So let's look at reinventing government versus New Public Management. Again, they're both considered forms of managerialism, but they're slightly different. The reinventing government movement involves creating entrepreneurial organizations, reducing red tape, think about putting the customer first. It empowers employees to get results, again, to be more creative, inventive. It's also cutting back to the basics, producing better government for less. And it was really, in the early 90s, during the Clinton administration, Al Gore was tasked with reinventing the federal government. It's really based on a well-known book by Osborne and Gabler called Reinventing Government. New Public Management, again, is a slightly different version of managerialism. It tends to be bolder and larger scale, using market-like mechanisms for those parts of the public sector that could not be transferred directly into private ownership. So it became more of a quasi-market approach. It intensified organizational and spatial decentralization. There was constant emphasis on the need to improve service quality. There was also an insistence that greater attention be given to the wishes of the individual service user or consumer. So there the slight differences are. Under reinventing government, you're focusing on efficiency, cutting the red tape, and treating your customer as a consumer. again, through competition choice, whereas new public management introduced more direct market mechanisms, getting rid of government assets, privatizing things, stuff like that. And in recent years, there's been the development of e-government. That's embracing technologies to improve service delivery. The term e-government is kind of a generic umbrella term that encompasses really anything digital. The internet, software packages, web-based internal operations, online forms, management information systems, many other electronic interfaces with citizens. It really benefits in terms of cost reduction and can really improve quality of services and speed. Rather than standing in line all day to renew your license, now you can do some of those services online. The rise of social media has really helped this. It allows for interactive communications. It's a great way for governments to get the word out. A lot of emergency services can use social media now. Police are very active on social media, talking about crimes and what's going on, in live when events are happening. They will not stream video, but provide updates through various social media outlets. Unfortunately, there needs to be a balance. There's a dilemma in e-management. How governance is going to work online or in cyberspace in terms of how it impacts citizens or different interest groups in society as larger society. It requires a new model for virtual management. The role of IT will really alter service delivery processes. It will alter organizational structures. It'll change the workforce. It'll require new knowledge. The use of analytics will become much more important. And all this stuff must be developed at the same time as e-government and social media and all those things continue to expand. So in a lot of ways, a lot of local governments especially are always playing catch up to changes in technology.